Radio Wales.
Yeah, fool if you think it's over. Chris Rea, of course, not over yet. We're here for another 50 minutes almost, and let me tell you. Now then, Roy Noble it is on BBC Radio Wales. And Benjamin Stimpson is an award-winning writer, researcher and speaker on folk practice, occultism and British folklore generally, author of Ancestral Whispers in 2023 and now of Doves and Ravens. Ben shares expertise on the history of magic, witchcraft and spiritual traditions through public talks, festivals and podcasts across North America and Europe. Benjamin, you're very welcome.
Hello, Shumai. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks for asking. I'm firing on more cylinders, I'm glad to say. Now then, your new book here of Doves and Ravens has been described as an encyclopedia of magical Wales. Mm-hmm. And then you make the point that actually Wales has been hidden aside, the ones myriad of stories that come out of England.
Absolutely. I put this book together because there wasn't anything like it, at least nothing like it in English. There are a couple of really excellent ones in Welsh. Unfortunately, dwi ddim siarad Cymraeg, dwi'n dysgu Cymraeg, so they were not accessible to me. So so I wanted to put this together for mostly an English-speaking audience, and an English-speaking audience in North America. I spent 30 years of my life over in North America. I am from Wales originally, but there's such a huge diaspora over there. So I started putting this together and morphed into this.
Right. What area of Canada were you in for so many years?
I was in Ontario, so we lived, my parents, we had a pub up in North Wales for a long time, and we moved to about 2 hours outside of Toronto, so huge Welsh population in Ontario.
There are, yeah. My father actually emigrated to Canada on a £10 emigration scheme in 1926 and ended up in a place called Merritt and Penticton and Kamloops in British Columbia.
In British Columbia, yes.
Far west indeed. So I could have been a Canadian, you never know, But he came back.
You never know, right? Accident of birth.
No, I came back, met my mother, and here I am. But
love it.
No, then this encyclopedic way you've written this, it's a great way of doing it, isn't it? People can slot in very quickly.
It is. It's one of those, I learned folklore through some encyclopedias like this, and I think it's very accessible for people, particularly when you place stories with places and maps, because then people can visualize it, right? Yes. And one of my hopes was to create a handy guidebook for those people who are into the witchy nonsense, want to go and do spooky kind of road trips, right? And I think I've accomplished it. There's a lot in here. There's a lot of places just off the beaten track that people can go and visit that you wouldn't know otherwise, right?
No, exactly right. And this is the interesting thing. And Wales is a relatively small place to tour, and people can reach them indeed. There are many places in Wales with stories to say that I have visited, and the many others that I haven't, in fact. And they should be sort of brought to our attention more and more avidly, and more often, in fact. And this business we were relatively unknown outside our own country. We knew our own stories, but other people didn't.
Yes.
That's right.
Very much so.
And the book explores Gwrach, Dinon Hyspys, market fortune tellers, the whole gambit across. How far back are you going then in history in terms of where these stories come from?
Absolutely. So this is the thing, right? I think for listeners in Wales here, obviously we have our Mabinogi, right? The stories of Cerridwen and stories of, the four branches. That's very well known outside of Wales because of pagan spirituality, druidry, a lot of Arthurian lore. It's well known because of that.
Yes.
But when it comes to our folklore, what we're really looking at is about 500 years, because that's the scope of the written record. A lot of our lore was unfortunately either destroyed or replaced because of the oppression of the Welsh language, right? And so a lot of people moving and shifting around, a lot of people emigrating, right? You find elements of the folklore in Ontario, in the Welsh areas of Ontario, but it's so different, right? It's forgotten. A lot of folklore around the world is forgotten because of the 20th century, people moving around. So what I had to do was go into the sources, and those are really only only about 500 years. But it's always funny for me how people think folklore is so ancient, but it mutates every generation.
Yes,
So
indeed.
stories we get used to, like the local one in my area is Arabella Fowler, Big Bella of Denbigh, right? And she was an actual historical card reader. She was this little old lady who would hobble around Denbighshire and attend the markets about 200 years ago. And she was reading cards, she was telling fortunes, she was a historical Dina Taspes. And her story in 200 years switched to suddenly she's a cannibal, part of the Llandona witches, and so she's remembered in that way. So folklore just can change really rapidly in even 100 years, right?
Yes, yes.
Stories tend to merge because of travel routes, right? You know, you've got people on the main London to Holyhead route going through all the little inns.
Yes.
And what are they doing? They're telling stories, they're connecting stories, they're gossiping about things, right? So stories tend to merge and evolve. And then suddenly you've got, you know, figures from, you know, the farthest, like reaches of Wrexham all the way to the, you know, Holyhead. And suddenly they're connected, even though it's a huge distance, really. I mean, it's days travel back in those days,
Yes.
but it's connected. So, but it's yeah, it's fascinating, some of those stories. The Llandona witches, particularly, are
Yeah.
very well known outside of Wales because of the sources that people have. So, Mary Trevelyan, for example, or Reverend Elias Owen, who I'm a bit of a fangirl for. He's an incredible writer. But those are the ones that are accessible because they're free on the internet. A lot of these sources are not free on the internet, so
No,
they're
no.
not known.
No, no,
Yeah.
indeed. And many
Yeah.
came as a surprise to you, obviously, in your research.
There were so many that I did not know. Obviously, there were a couple of stories that I grew up with. So just outside of Cerwys, just south is Tremercian, and I knew that there was some sort of a wizard who had lived in that place because an old woman who we went on little field trips with told me the story.
Yes.
They didn't know that that his tradition. He was part of a much bigger tradition of legendary wizards and cunning folk. So that was really interesting. But I didn't know the name, and when I started to research this, obviously there were parts of Wales I'd never been to, and so it was really interesting to see the regional variations. It was really interesting to see the same stories come up again and again and again in different regions, just attached to different names, you know.
Right. It's incredibly interesting, really, going back in this way. I'll tell you what, Benjamin, we'll take a break over music,
Yes.
and I will come back and continue
Fabulous.
the conversation, all right? Yeah, there was Faith Hill giving us a breather there. This Kiss, indeed. She could have been talking, of course, about Gustav Klint's painting in 1907, or Rodin's sculpture, of course, but actually she's one of the most successful American country stars, having a little go there too, and well done to her. But with me now is Benjamin Stimson.
Hello.
We'll be, well, Benjamin, nice of you to hang around, as it were. And your book
Thank
of
you, thank
Doves
you.
and Ravens, the Witches and Wisefolk of Wales and the Borders. And do you see echoes of these traditions now in modern Wales at all, whether in story, in practice, or even, popular culture?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. A lot of the stories in this book were actively being told even as early as 1950s, right?
Right.
And so there are stories. You can go into any place and you will find even relatives of some of these historical people. So you go down to Cwtacadno, for example.
Right.
There are still family members of the famous Dr. Harris, who was a very famous member of the dynasty of Dunhuspis down that way. And his stories are all over the place. And there are still artifacts. The house is still there that was his family's home, where they performed all of these magics.
Yes.
Throughout, if you ever come across a tomb inside a wall of a church, there's at least 5 examples I know strewn throughout the country. There is always a legend connected to that, connecting that to a local wizard who tried to cheat the devil, right? And that is a widespread motif. You go to places like the Devil's Bridge. There's one in Hereford. There's one in just north of Aberystwyth up that way. And the stories are still being told. And of course, Beth Gellert. You go to Beth Gellert, and that story is told over and over and over again, right? Yeah, the stories are still being told. I think we are a very proud people, and this is what the journey I went through reconnecting with this material was to really understand how proud the Welsh are with their legends and their lore, because it's so ingrained in the culture to tell stories and to tell stories about sometimes ridiculous things, but things that make total sense a few hundred years ago. You know,
quite. And some of them are simple, aren't they? Are some people given simple tasks like a cow is missing or something? Find a cow, or that kind of thing.
That's exactly it. Yeah, the Dunhuspice are the Welsh equivalent of the Pellers down in Cornwall, the Cunning Folk and Wisefolk in Scotland and England, the fairy doctors over in Ireland, and there's all over the place in Europe. And that's essentially what they were. They were a historical profession that was a secondary branch of kind of a spiritual recourse. Two often merge. So you often find like the legendary Dunhuspice being said to be vicars or to be ministers, Methodist ministers or free-thinking ministers. Right. And the use of the Bible in that is found in both.
Dynion Hospice, the knowing ones as well. Tell me, what the marches of Wales then? The marches very often are the misty areas of Wales, aren't they?
And I think people don't realise how much of Welsh culture still exists and thrives in that region, right? It's right next door. It was a part of Wales officially once, but there's still a huge number of Welsh speakers in Shropshire, Herefordshire. A lot of the legends are very similar. The landscape is very similar. It's not like you come off the Welsh mountains and suddenly it's just the plain of England, right? There's it really is a zone. It's very similar to the border of Scotland in that way. People who identify as both, right? It's you find that the legends are very similar. So there's a legend of the Dun Cow. So this is a motif going straight into England of a massive cow that appears out of nowhere one day and feeds the people because there's a drought or there's a famine that goes on, and a witch will come out of complete spite and milk it until it's completely empty. It's a miraculous cow that just feeds and feeds and feeds, doesn't seem to empty, but she milks it until it's empty. There's a story of that in Denbighshire. There's a story of that in Mitchell's Fold in Shropshire. And all over the place. So you see the mixing of English and Welsh to form a third zone, but equally as proud.
Yes, some of them could be quite constructive as well as destructive, because I gather that, the word witch, grach, was imported into the Welsh language, and we didn't go down the trail of doing away with witches, did we? Or was there only 5 official witchcraft trials were in Wales?
5, only 5. And the reason that witchgrach came into the language was because they needed that word to describe in order for them to go through the list. Magic in Wales was not a thing that was evil. It was just something that everybody did. What was more evil in Wales was thievery, right? So you see a lot more laws all over the place, in all the various cantrefs, about thieves and theft. And it makes sense. You're a small agrarian community. The thing that you don't want is trust to be broken. So if somebody's stealing from us, then we're not going to trust our neighbours, and that destroys the community. Yes. And magic was one way of... magic and charming. Cursing was another one. Of course, we have some excellent stories and practices of cursing wells. The Curse of St. Elian up on the north coast there is a prime example of that. And people would go and they would curse. And that is what determined whether or not you were good or bad, was what you did with the magic, not just practicing magic in general.
Right. Well, intriguing. Intriguing.
Oh, thank you,
Benjamin.
I had a lot of fun writing this.
Oh, I bet you did. Yeah. So the title is "Like Doves and Ravens: The Witches and Wisefolk of Wales." and the borders. Well, there we are. If you're in any way interested, well, you can get hold of it. If you're not interested and suddenly you get hold of it, it'll be a bonus for you. Well done, Benjamin. Many thanks to you indeed for joining us. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Diolch yn fawr i chi. Here we are. Benjamin Stimson is the author of a very intriguing book that will be telling us all about various, well, side issues in Wales, witches and, well, magicians and all kinds of, well, threat beyond that, and possibly positive help as well.